Well, good morning. So we continue the journey after Louis had his experience with Rena. It was a foregone conclusion that, again, his life as he knew it, his studies at the Institute and whatever would come to an end. The purpose of his whole journey to San Francisco was simply to meet Rena and receive his destiny, and then begin the long, difficult process of dealing with that. So it seems to be part of this evolutionary process that there needs to be this integration, the dark and the light, and this journey toward wholeness or holiness. So it required this period, which at least the initial phase took about 9 years, starting in San Francisco, eventually taking Louis to the northern Sierras with his first wife, and then Boulder, Colorado, then leaving that situation and back to San Francisco, then up to Napa Valley, then Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Hartford, West Hartford, Connecticut, and that's where, basically returning to his source where he was born, Hartford, Connecticut. This would be again where the final collapse would happen, initiating again a rebirthing process. So the crash literally ended with a very, very dramatic car accident. And again, it was fascinating for me to see how resilient Louis was, because he was actually in therapy for, I think, 14 months. And he would see his therapist Rick, I think his name was, every Monday morning. And Rick would always ask him, after it was very well established that there's only one way out of this dilemma, and that's to surrender. So each week the question would come up, is it bad enough yet? And obviously for many, 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 many weeks, Louis would say no. Sometimes Rick would put his hand on Louis's knee. Louis often would cry. It was one of those things where he knew it had to get bad enough where then there was no, it was either like he was going to die or he would surrender, and eventually he did. The car crash came on November 3rd, 1985. Seeing Rick on November 4th, still he had the ability, somehow totally devastated by this crash, to still not quite get it. But just moments after the therapy session ended, Louis walked back to his abode and collapsed in surrender, crying out for the first time. And this again is the first time that, the first time that Louis directly interacted with me, engaged me, crying out to me, saying, I surrender, I can't do this anymore, please. And basically I sent him the message. I whispered to him that as long as you're able to do this, meaning surrender, you'll never have to worry ever again. And that brought a big wave of peace to Louis, and he submitted to the obvious requirement. Next would go to a 28-day treatment center in Spofford, New Hampshire, to go through detox, and because obviously his big part of this whole journey was extreme amounts of alcohol and a fair amount of drug usage, and just a very, very dark spiral down. So again, not to belabor that, it was just a necessary way again for Louis to be broken, that he might again, open this time to getting help. Okay, so like most, everybody has their egoic resistance, and it was interesting that Louis was in his treatment center, just again, it's a process. It's a process that pretty much everybody goes through, because it's very, very humbling to admit, and this is part of the beauty of the 12 steps, that there's a way that they can embrace one in their wretchedness. There's one of the principal songs that gets sung in treatment centers is Amazing Grace. And of course, that goes, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And at first, Louis never wanted to say the word wretch. He would say soul or whatever, but after a while, he really was able to embrace this part, again, as part of his humanity that feels so wretched, that feels so lost. Yeah, it's quite a process to see the individual build up this egoic structure that protects it, protects it from feeling these feelings of desolation, feelings of desperation. It's not an easy thing, and this is probably the key, similar to Louis initially answering the call when I called him to follow my guidance, that it would be a continual process to peel away the layers of this defensive structure, so that again, one day he might become, as he is now, a very open, useful device for me to use. Again, this is, the purpose of your evolution as a species is to move into this relationship with me, not me an entity, but what I represent, the eternal realm, that there will be this natural expansion that your species needs a huge awakening, because once again you open to this relationship, it's no longer you as an egoic structure, you as a mental structure trying to figure out how to save yourself, how to save the planet. It's the opposite of that. It's letting go of the thought, the idea, the belief that it's your responsibility, that it's your job. It's not. So again, it takes a lot, because there's this paradox where, in your seeming weakness, in your brokenness, is actually your strength, and that's that takes a lot to learn. So Louis broke down. I remember the time that he actually, in his circle, his therapist, everybody gets a handle, and so he had to say, I'm Louis, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm terrified of being like you. He was terrified of opening to his vulnerability, his ordinariness. Again, this is something he'd been saddled with, this thing, going, wow, there's something very not ordinary about me, something very special about me. And that was, again, the hurdle that he would have to overcome, because there was nothing special about him, simply that he became willing. So it was a process that the first time he broke open saying that and just started sobbing and had to leave the circle. His personal therapist was there to hold him, and he cried and cried and cried on her shoulder. And then she said, "What do you want to do?" And for the first time, Louis said, "Well, I want to go back to my room and pray." He had been given the big book, and a roommate of his had showed him this. There's this really cool prayer, third step prayer. You might want to use it. And Louis, in his contempt, was like, "No, prayer's not for me." But it took a week or 10 days, whatever, and prayer suddenly became very much for him. So he went back to his room, and on his knees, he started saying the third step prayer. You know, it was so lovely because I was there, and behind him, just giving him this big hug as he prayed again, giving him that message. This is good. This is what is necessary. This will help. This is what works. In the third step prayer basically says, "God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will." There's a little bit more, but that's essentially it. Just giving one's life over to God. So Louis went through a phase where he kind of suddenly believed in this Father God, and that's normal. I supported that. In fact, once when he was praying, there was a special forgiveness exercise that a nun led for the patients at the treatment center, and Louis again broke down crying and asking for forgiveness to this Father God. And of course, I represented that. So I answered his request for forgiveness. And when I told him, "There's nothing to forgive. I've always loved you." And so, again, very easy for Louis to, in this vulnerable position, receive that message that he was deeply loved, unconditionally loved. And this again is something that every human craves, to really feel this, to really know this level of unconditional love that typically you don't get from other humans. You need to have the relationship with the divine, where that's the nature of love. Love doesn't have any conditions. Love as expressed through me. So it was a lovely thing to witness how beautifully Louis responded. By the end of his 28-day treatment program, he accepted the advice of his counselors, who said, you know, to really get the full measure of this rebirth, they didn't use that word, of course, but it is a rebirthing. They recommended a 6-month halfway house in Springfield. And Louis accepted. He was in a position where, again, he had no other alternative. He didn't have any better ideas of how to move forward with his life. And, you know, the first month, you don't spend a lot of time figuring out or trying to figure out your future. You just want to get help. You just want to open yourself and allow yourself to be helped. So shortly after, he moved into the halfway house in Springfield. It was an unusual place for Louis. I mean, most of the residents of a halfway house tend to be, you know, this is all for men. They have halfway houses for women as well. But these are mostly drug addicts and alcoholics that are in and out. You know, they'll tend to, and this was wintertime now, Louis was getting out of his month in treatment, middle of December. And so a lot of residents of halfway houses are basically guys that don't want to be on the street in the wintertime. So they sober up or pretend to be sober for a while to get in off the streets. Anyway, Louis was highly motivated. He didn't really spend much time relating with the other men in the halfway house. He pretty much stayed to himself and listened to music and read some some things, mostly AA related material, but I'm sure he had some other books with him. And again, the point of this part of the story is, again, Louis being willing to trust. Okay, and so because he was so willing to trust, he didn't spend a lot of time planning or thinking about anything after the 6 months. He was pretty comfortable just being there. He got a part-time job at a nearby city library, and yeah, he was he saved a little bit of money because he pretty much, when he went into the treatment center, he had to go through a bankruptcy process, and he literally had nothing. So it was kind of sweet. He saved, I think he had to give half of whatever income he made at the library to the halfway house for rent. They wanted guys to contribute something for their housing and food, and then he keep the other half. And I think he probably actually saved maybe $15 or $20 a week that he was saving toward buying a bicycle. By springtime, he would get out on his bicycle, and he really went through a pretty amazing process where, not only was he for this dark period consuming vast amounts of alcohol and taking drugs, but he was also smoking and doing quite a few unhealthy things. So it was clear to him early in his stay at the halfway house that he was watching these other guys just smoking and drinking coffee, and which he was doing also, but he decided as things went along, maybe, I don't know how long it was, maybe a month or 2 months, that, okay, he was ready to really clean house, quit smoking, quit drinking coffee, had his bicycle, started really turning his obsession into being healthy, he started riding his bicycle, getting up to eventually 60 miles, 50 or 60 miles a day. He started training for it to do a century in the spring where you bicycle 100 miles. So he put all of that creative energy that he had into just kind of physically rebirthing himself, becoming very healthy and not just sober. Of course, went to AA meetings, and the important part of this segment is to outline how Louis was guided toward his next surrogate mother, who was waiting for him in Amherst, Massachusetts. He was getting near the end of his 6 months, and his counselor, Maurice, was asking Louis, so, you're going to be graduating soon. You need to have a plan. Where are you going? You can have a job. Because it was clear to Louis that he wasn't going to go back and live with his family, or again, it was very, very clear that, again, just like he knew in the first phase of his rebirthing, that his birth family was not his true family. He knew now, as a result of this healing process, that his birth family actually was quite toxic, especially his father, who was an active alcoholic. And so, Louis would make the decision that he wouldn't see his father for a period of time, ended up being 5 years, and even limited, visits with his sister or mom. Really wanted to establish a new sense of family. And when Maurice was asking, well, you have to decide where you're going to go if you're not going to go back, stay with your family. I said, well, there's this whole health expo coming to Springfield this next weekend. I'm pretty sure I'm going to find out at this event my next step. And so sure enough, he went on Saturday, the first of the 2-day weekend. And there were many presenters and that were from the Northampton, Amherst area. And so it became very clear that, oh, this is like a real healing place, spirituality and lots of things that were interesting to Louis. So he decided that on Saturday that he would move to that area. And then it was on Sunday morning that he met Claire Ludlow, and she was giving a talk on this thing called A Course in Miracles. And 10 minutes into that hour presentation, Louis was convinced, wow, this is it. This is my next step. I'm going to move to Amherst, Massachusetts and study A Course in Miracles with Claire Ludlow. So he told her that at the end of the talk, and she was like, oh, great. Well, we have this place called Harmony Institute where we have our classes. She recommended that he start in September when they begin a new year-long study of the workbook. Louis was a little disappointed because this was only like June. So he had to occupy himself for the whole summer before he would move up there. But he did it. She recommended some tapes, Beverly Hutchinson tapes, Course in Miracles with some music, piano music, Stephen Halpern. And that was lovely. And Louis decided, well, just for the summer, I'll go stay with my sister, Lynn, who was also in recovery, so that he felt that was a safe place for him to be. Go to a lot of AA meetings and ride his bicycle like crazy every day and stay healthy and wait out the summer. And then the next phase, which was a beautiful phase, and I'll describe that next time we sit together, but his time in Amherst, Mass, which would be 3 years, was really a remarkable, it was really the perfect womb. You can imagine a rebirthing womb, Claire and Peg Holcomb and these other women, and I'm sure some men, but the group at Harmony Institute was very, very precious. And Claire and her husband, Ben Ludlow, were, again, they became his surrogate parents. Louis spent a lot of time with them, visiting at their house, doing yard work and whatever in exchange for just time hanging out with them, having meals with them. And it was a beautiful time. I'll save that for next time. Keep this shorter today. But the key thing to take away from today's presentation is that this dark journey is very, very necessary. It's very important that the darkness that each of us carries is able to fully be brought to the light. Okay, there's a great line from A Course in Miracles that says, the holiest of all places is where an ancient hatred becomes a present love. And you humans sort of have a built-in problem that because of this egoic development, that's a form of self-hatred, that you have denied and projected your beauty, your glory, your divinity away from yourself, okay? Hence the necessity of me, this higher self that is your memory of your holiness. Okay? I am Louis's memory of his holiness. Okay? But it takes this, because there has been this problem, again, it's just part of the species, just like the way Louis talks about the tribal and egoic, your tribal mind is very shame-based. This is why tribal people are very easily controlled by churches and institutions and all that, because they're very easily shamed. They sort of live at the level Louis mentioned, this whole Hawkins scale. Shame and fear is what governs the tribal conditioning. You know, it's just basic survival. The tribal mind is all about just surviving, keeping the body alive, and everything is seen as a sort of an enemy to be protected from, and the wolf is always at the door. Anyway, the egoic structure is very much consumed by hatred, special hatred. And again, because we don't want to acknowledge hatred, self-hatred, again, the ego, what the ego does is denies the self-hatred and projects hatred out onto other people, places, and things. So this very judgmental mental construct needs to be broken down. And when it's broken down, then the individual is consumed with this self-hatred, which of course, once it's acknowledged, can easily be healed by love. Okay, the solution to hatred is simply just a lack of love. So hatred is easily healed or transformed by love. So Louis is in this stage now of, he just immersed himself in years and years of self-destructive, self-hatred behaviors. And now it's time for him, again, like a little baby, to be born in an environment where he feels just endless amounts of love, unconditional love from his own divine self, as well as, pretty high levels of human love and kindness. And this would be his healing journey for the years to come. So we'll end for now with this, but just remember again, because this individual story is meant to be a reflection of your story and also your collective story, and that what you as a collective now is going through is all of this hatred coming to the surface so it can be acknowledged and healed or transformed. Again, there's simply a lack of genuine love in the world today, which has a remedy, okay? And that's the reconnection with the divine, infinitely powerful love that will transform your whole species into the new species, okay? Okay, again, which I represent. So have a beautiful day, receive the blessing from the Sun King, and rock and roll, baby.